Welcome to the Low-Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD podcast. Now we're getting back to our roots, the important stuff. Unfortunately, Tro had a little family emergency he had to take care of, so you're stuck with me this time, Brian Lenskis. I never say my name. My patients always get upset that I never say my name, but we have a big guest here. Someone who's half the man he used to be, Tom Seest. Welcome. Tro and I saw your story on Twitter and we're like, oh my gosh, we got to get him on. So I think Tro reached out to you, and now we have you on. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm one of those rare stories where I never really had health problems until I lost weight, which is remarkable as big as I was. And so we can get into that. But
yeah, tell people. Let's start at the beginning. Like, how was childhood? Did you gain weight as a kid? Did you gain weight later on? Was it kind of the family stuff? Just so people get a flavor of what your life has been like up till this point.
Yeah, so I grew up in the middle of Illinois. Literally, if you look at Illinois, just poke your finger right in the middle near Bloomington. I grew up near there in a small town, and a very, very active childhood. I was one of three siblings, my parents. And literally starting at the age of 5, I was mowing lawns, delivering newspapers, and active 24/7. And as part of that experience, I would earn money, and I knew nothing about saving money. And so, on the newspaper routes in the morning, I would grab a couple of Mellow Yellows, chock full of sugar, and literally 2 1-pound bags of candy every day. And, as I'm a big believer in counting calories. Now, anyhow, I would eat that on the paper route. It was a 2.5-hour thing every morning. And then I had an afternoon paper route. And I figure if I retrace my route now, it's about 6 miles a day of activity. And I did that clear through high school. So in high school, I picked up weight. Senior year, I was about 30 pounds overweight based on standards, and lost it. And then immediately moved to Minnesota to work with my uncle on his farm. And I picked up 50 pounds that summer, tossing hay bales literally till dark, till they got too heavy to toss. And of course, I was following the traditional model. You got to sugar up, you got to carb up. And so my aunt, who was fantastic, the Schwann truck would show up once a week. She would literally buy me a 5-gallon pail of ice cream for the week. And and just unlimited soda in the fields and stuff. But even with all that activity, I put on 50 pounds that summer.
What was some of that muscle mass from doing all the work too and stuff, or do you think it was fat weight?
It was a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, I was definitely getting heavier.
Well, and I think that's a testimony about, we say, oh, if I work hard, I'll work out so I could eat whatever I want. And all of us have fallen into that trap too. I was like, oh, I worked out hard today, so I can have some extra pizza tonight, or I can have this. And so we start not realizing that the caloric intake needs to match up also with what we're doing.
Well, and the other thing is we're literally loading semis. And so you're throwing these bales up 12, 14 layers. And when you do that, you're cycling carbs so fast that you bonk if you're not putting carbs in, and you're not a fat burner. But of course, I didn't know any of that at the time. I'd heard the name Atkins, but never really considered myself to be fat. So fast forward, first year of college, I put on another 100 pounds.
Wow.
And that was 1984.
So what's your weight up to at this point when you gain 100 pounds? Are you like
about 350? I was about
350
okay. At the end of the first year of college. And so then I moved to Georgia for the summer and sold Bibles door to door. And
wow.
I was active again. And so I lost a bunch of weight, and kind of stayed active playing basketball, full court basketball, golf and stuff, until I got married in '89. And when I got married, I weighed 235. So I'd done fairly good, getting it back down to kind of in control.
And how tall are you, so people understand?
6'6.5" at the time. I have since shrunk.
Yeah, that happens to us. I know. I'm not happy about
Yes.
that either.
Yeah, I'm a hunchback now. So anyhow, we started our happy marriage of 34 years in May. And I played full court basketball for 5-6 years, golfed 3 or 4 rounds a week, walking, and I would fluctuate with weight, but didn't have what I would consider a serious problem until after our second son was born. I fell down a set of steps at my brother's house, and that was the end of exercise. I had done something to my back, and I fast forwarded through a period of time where I was a QA coordinator in a hospital for 3.5 years. So before I got married, I was actually a quality assurance coordinator running infection control tests in a hospital setting. And the one thing that I learned from that experience was there are good doctors, but there are doctors that, they're human.
Tom, don't tell our secrets, man.
Yes. Well,
yeah, and I think we've learned that over the last couple of years, who you can trust and who you can't. That's just remarkable.
Yes. So what happened was our doctor, we grew up, we attended a home church, and the doctor, my family doctor growing up, that actually delivered me, actually married us. He's in Illinois. You can do that if you're a recognized preacher in the church. And, he retired about the time we got married. And so when that happened, I just quit going to doctors. I literally didn't have a doctor. So fast forward, I fall down the stairs, quit exercising, and apparently started putting on weight. Now, the reason I say apparently is about that time, my second business started to tank. I went into debt about $600,000. So this is like 1998, 99 for context. And so like most people that are driven, I just wanted to power through it. So I started working long hours. And it's going to sound stupid, but I didn't realize I was heavy until I was on a trip. I was doing business. I was doing development for Hobby Lobby in Oklahoma City. And I realized that there was only one store I could buy shirts in. And it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. Yeah, I can't go to Walmart. I can't go to a big and tall store. There's this one store right outside of Jefferson City, Missouri, on the highway that I could get 9X shirts. I'm like, oh, okay, so I've got a problem probably. And that's when I realized I was heavy.
Yes, because you don't realize, because you're so focused and you're trying to save the business. You're just
exactly.
And a lot of us are like that. The people I see struggle the most are busy moms that are really trying to take care of their kids, and they put themselves last, and they're on survival mode. And you go, okay, I'll worry about that later. But then years pass.
Yep.
And so I'd like to take one step back. I'm sorry, Tom. I just want to take one step back just because in case someone's thinking the same thing that I was wondering is, you gained 100 pounds in college. What do you attribute that to? Was it like you would take study breaks and eat, or was it stress, or was it inactivity? What would you attribute those 100 pounds that you put on? And then we'll get back to your story. Sorry.
Well, I ate too much and I didn't move enough. Oh, sorry. That's
yeah, that's true. That's part of it, right?
So what happened was I was going to Bradley University full time. At the time, I was a freshman. So I had full-time class hours, but then I had 3 jobs too, because I was cash flowing college. I was, paying for it as I went. And so I would work all day, and I ate 1 meal a day. And wow. I remember at the time, it was usually a 50-piece chicken McNugget at McDonald's, or it was 2 Wendy's triples with fries and drinks. I would sleep in my car, and then I would go down to the health club in the morning. And the only reason for the health club membership was to shower. Mm-hmm. I would shower, and then I would go back I never went to school. I literally, when I'd show up the first day of class, I would literally tell the teachers I'm showing up for test. They said, fine. And so, that sounds bad, but I carried a 3.1. So it wasn't terrible for not attending and not studying.
Well, and I think that's another really, I want to make this point is, you're not just a glutton guy sitting around doing nothing. You're busting your butt the whole time. You've been physical activity. You're a smart guy. You're going to school. you're smart enough not to take on a bunch of debt like I did at school, and you realize you got to pay that back at some point.
Yeah.
Before we recorded, I just said I just paid off my school
Right.
loans, 53, and finally paid off my med school loans. I went to med school with no debt because I worked through my college years, and then
Right.
med school, forget it. So anyways, that just shows, that effect, and probably, the stress of working 3 jobs and, trying to go to school and working. And so you're just, like me in that way. And a lot of people who are in medicine are like that. They just plow through and go, okay,
Yes.
I'm just going to keep working till I get that degree or whatever I'm shooting at.
Yeah.
So then
So
we
when I
fast
got
forward
out of,
now.
yeah, I literally dropped out of college, and the local hospital at the time had 30 beds, but it had a long-term care, short-term care, alcohol rehab. It had a bunch of stuff. It was a really nice hospital. They wanted to hire me as an administrator because the people in town knew me. It's not that I was stupid, but so I dropped out, and I literally went there as a QA coordinator. So getting back to 3 kids later, 3 sons, coming home from Oklahoma City, I decided, well, maybe I should weigh. And I couldn't weigh on any scale we owned. We had one that would go up to 500 pounds, and it just pegged. And so I walked into a Jenny Craig in St. Louis. At the time, I was commuting in St. Louis. And their eyes were spinning like dollar signs, thinking, okay. And they had 2 scales together, and they still couldn't weigh me. They were I think they were 300 or 350 doctor scales, whatever the doctor scales go up to. And so at that point, I said, well, I've got a problem. I've got to figure it out. And so I did extensive research, and that was.
How did you feel at that time? I mean, were you embarrassed, or you just go, hey, this is my situation? What was your feeling emotionally at that point?
The only thing that I remember about it was thinking, I'm not very self-aware, which sounds stupid for somebody that's working, 18-hour days, kind of like a doctor. But literally, I'm so focused on getting the debt down and all this other stuff that I literally just didn't know. I mean, it sounds stupid until the clothing incident. It's like, oh, wow, I can't buy clothing anywhere else.
Sometimes you just don't realize it because you're grinding. You're grinding.
Living large.
Yeah, living large. And then the other thing that the important point you said just in passing was like you were doing 1 meal a day, but it was a horrible meal. So a lot of us, myself included, did 1 meal a day and it wasn't working, and I wasn't losing weight. I'm like, what am I doing with this 1 meal a day? It's like, even if I'm eating low carb. So some people, you got to change up what you're doing too. Plus,
by then I was back to more than 1 meal because I was out of college. The guy that I worked for, at the time they were expanding the St. Louis airport, and I was on the IT department of the expansion team. The guy that was in charge of our team had 30 people working for him. He would pay me to pick up donuts every day from Krispy Kreme. And so he said, pick up 2, one's for you. So I would have 1 dozen donuts up until noon. And then he would take everybody to Longhorn or some big steakhouse for lunch. And then I'd come home and my wife would feed me. And so by then I was at 3 meals a day that weren't very good. I mean, some of them were okay.
You're going to count Krispy Kremes as a meal, huh?
Well, you need a dozen of them. That's a meal.
Yeah, wow. Wow. Plus the other point that you made that was really critical that I want to touch on too is that because in college finances were an issue, the cheapest thing you could do is get these huge Happy Meals and all these things because it's like a couple bucks instead of going and buying a steak and salad. Like you wouldn't be paying 40. Well, back then it was a lot cheaper. But you start realizing to eat well, it costs more money too.
Well, and the other thing is I would go through 6 liters of soda a day. So I would go to Shop and Save and buy 2 3-liter bottles. And that was my soda for the day. So you can imagine the blood sugar. Now, I don't know how bad the blood sugar got because keep in mind, I had dropped doctors when my family doctor retired. And so I didn't go to doctors. It just wasn't I feared them. I respected them, but I also feared them in a way. And then because of my experiences. And then, so anyhow, I just kept living life, still working long hours. But I did extensive research, and I knew that a guy in church, we went to a Baptist church in a small town, and I noticed that he had lost about 70 pounds. So I asked him, well, how did you do it? And he goes, I did Atkins. And I said, well, it looks to me like you just eat meat and cheese. And he goes, yep, that's the diet. I said, okay. That was my extensive research. Called my mother. My mother said, yeah, I did Atkins at one point. I said, okay, I'm going to do Atkins. So that was 20 minutes of research and I'm on Atkins, right? So that was around 2004, 2005. I did a sprint of Atkins, and I did take off weight to the point that about 2008, I had I was going to say it's probably it was an hour and 45-minute commute one way. And at the time we had 3 boys, and I would get home from that commute and my knees were so sore that I could not take my shoes off. And, you know, everybody has their why. And that was my why, because I didn't want to have my boys have to take my shoes off the rest of my life. And so.
And you, how old were you at this time?
Let's see, 2008. So I was born in 65, about a little over 40. Is that right? Yeah. And so
40-year-old thinking, look, I don't want my kids to have to start taking care of me and take my shoes off already at 40. So
yes.
that tells you something.
Yeah. So, but later on they had to do it anyway, but that's another story we'll get into. So in any case, I started doing Atkins in a really odd way. I had a cooler in the back of my car for the commute, and I would buy their shakes and their candy bars, and I would keep them in the cooler. And then I did 1 meal a day because I didn't have time because of the long commute. I was doing an hour and a half there, hour and 45 minutes back. And I would eat 1 meal at lunch, and it was always either steak and cheese and green beans, or it was catfish, grilled catfish. It was pretty much probably keto, but I didn't know what keto was at the time, never even heard of it. So I'm doing all this shake stuff. I eventually moved to what was called Walker diet shakes, which was protein shake that was low carb. It was 1 gram per serving. And then I would literally, in 2003, started cruising with my 2004 and 2003, I would go on cruises, started cruising a lot. I would literally pack a blender and a gallon of the shake mix. And I can tell you, I'm the only person that goes on cruises, and I would literally drink shakes. And then in 2008,
and how many calories were you taking at that time? Do you know? Was that part of it?
Without the meal, the calories were 300 a day with the 3 shakes.
Wow.
They were very low, but they were protein.
Yeah.
And then I had the big meal at lunch. And I remember we went on a cruise to Tortola in 2010. And I have a picture of it that I sent you, but my wife and I, no, my wife wasn't on that.
Yeah, we'll
cruise.
put that in the show notes, by the way. We have that, yes.
Yeah, so I get off the ship, and we did a tour, and we went to this bar in 2010 in October, and my mom took a picture of me because I had stood up. I was really proud that I could stand that long, but I had stood up on this little boat for about an hour and a half while they were doing this tour of the islands. But my back was killing me. You know, keep in mind, I have a back because I fell down the stairs, didn't go to a doctor. So she takes that picture at that bar. And when I got back from that cruise, it was the first time I could weigh. I could step on the scales, and that was in 2011. And my weight had finally gotten down to 495. I'd gotten off the ship, went home, and the scales worked. It was like, whoa. So keep in mind, it was, I don't know, 7, 8 years of, I don't know, do the math, 5, 6 years of torture, eating all these shakes, doing low carb kind of the wrong way, I guess is a good way of putting it. I mean, I wasn't a splurger, I wasn't a cheater, but I didn't exercise. Walking was terrible. In 2010, 2008 again, I actually was able to walk upstairs the first time on a cruise ship. And it was off the coast of Cabo San Lucas. I had my son take a picture of me, and I walked every single flight of stairs. And that was a big milestone because keep in mind, I would go on cruises knowing that if anything happened to the ship, I was dead. They shut off the elevators and I can't do stairs. I mean, I'm that big. But anyhow, I get back from that in the spring of 2011. And on April 6th, which is the day before my wife's birthday, I decided I'd gotten down low enough. I was 453 pounds. I'm going to start riding bicycle. So I bought a bike, hopped on the bike, rode 2 miles, and that was my wife's birthday gift. And she was so thrilled because the guy that sat in the basement in front of computers literally 18 hours a day is finally moving. So I did 2 miles. By the end of the month, I'd worked up to 20 miles. I did that in Oregon on a business trip. And then the first year I did 3,000 miles. So I'd added biking in. But I started listening to the wrong people. People said, well, you need to log your calories. Okay, so I loaded up MyFitnessPal. I did MyFitnessPal for 6 years, recorded all my calories in. I had heart rate strap on. I was, calculating calories coming out of Cyclometer and Strava, logging that in MyFitnessPal. Those records are all still there. And in 17,000 miles in 3.5 years, I managed to get down to 420 pounds. And so I knew something wasn't right, but when you're working all those hours and biking all those miles, you don't really think about it. And you'll relate to this because you live there. In 2014, in December, I finally heard of keto. I didn't know what it was, but I had listened to a Jimmy Moore podcast in October, and he was interviewing a doctor and his wife from Omaha, and they were bicyclists. I still have the episode. And I listened to it, and they would get on their bicycles in the morning. They would drink coffee with butter in it, and they would ride 40 to 50 miles at a time. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what that is, but I need to know what that is. So my son and I, we decided to bike from Santa Barbara down to the border on Highway 1 there, Pacific Coast Highway.
PCH.
Yeah, so we flew out there for that trip, and I loaded up my phone at the time with all the podcasts I could find on this thing called keto, and all the books and anything that I could read at night while we were doing this trip. And we started, the first day was like 10 miles, and then we stayed in Long Beach on the boat there. That was fun for 2 nights. And
Queen Mary.
Yeah, anyhow, we finished even with all the rest days, we finished in 10 days. And in that trip, I switched to keto. That was my inspiration. The problem was when I would bike my 45 milers, I would bonk. I knew what bonking was, and I was listening to all these bicyclists, and I would literally, when I would ride, I was so big, I would eat a Snickers bar every 3 miles, or I would bonk. If I didn't,
and you may have heard me talk about my cyclist who was doing that. He was carb loading like crazy. He was gaining a ton of weight while he was riding bikes. And then the winter he would lose weight when he wasn't riding his bike because he wasn't eating carb loading anymore. And
exactly.
So it's amazing. Once we got him, I was like, you don't really need to do that. And you see his sugar tracings now when he rides. It's unreal that he doesn't eat carbs and his sugars go crazy high when he's going up those big hills, just as mine do the same, and yours do the same, right?
I remember I was in Carpinteria with my son. We staying in a Motel 6, and that's when the light bulb went on above my head, and I'm like, well, the bicyclists are wrong. I can't be doing this carb loading, because keep in mind, I had done low carb until I started riding, and I rode about half a year before I started carb loading for these dumb rides, counting calories, doing everything the way I'm supposed to do it, the way all the smart doctors, not people like you that don't pay out their medical debt till yesterday. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Doing everything right. And so I'm going down the coast, and that's when the light bulb went on. And so I started keto, and started losing weight, of course. And I'm a slow loser. I didn't lose anything for the first 3.5 months. But I'm a very patient person, and that's what happens when you lose all that weight over years and you can't weigh. You just know you've got this long-term goal. And by then, of course, my knees were fine because I was bicycling. I didn't have the problem where the kids had to take off the shoes and stuff. And so when I switched to keto, I weighed 420 pounds and quickly got down to, by 2017, January 2017, I weighed 259.
Wow.
Yeah. So you'll see a second picture where my wife and I went on our anniversary cruise. And when we got to Tortola, where that bar was, instead of taking the ship there, we had bicycles on the ship. That's one thing I do, is bike in other countries. Some cruise lines let you take bikes. And we bicycled 14 miles each way to the bar, and we took the second picture, literally 5 years to the day in the same bar. Now, the funny thing is, a year later, hurricane came through and the bar isn't there anymore.
Wow.
But yeah, it's funny. Same bar seat and everything. And that's
I saw that picture too. It's great. We'll have that in the show notes too. And
yes,
to see that difference,
now you see the story.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, I had met this guy named Dave Feldman because I had been doing admin work for 2 keto dudes, and he was an admin, so I knew like Amber and a bunch of the other admins. And I was going to conferences, so I had met some people. And in early 2016, I talked to Dave. At the time, I was making really good money, and I talked to him about doing blood work. And I said, I'm willing to do fasted blood work for you, because one thing that's nice is when you still have weight on your body, it's easier to fast. And so I did 18 blood draws, and I believe it's 18 in 2016. They were extensive, $400 a piece. And that was at a discount Dave was getting. And did a bunch of fasted blood work for him. And the reason that's important was, keep in mind, my why was gone. I didn't know why I was doing any of this now. I know you believe in God. I know some people don't, they believe in other things, and that's fine. I believe in God, but I didn't have any idea why I was doing this. And so I did all this blood work. I had done a bunch of long fast. I had done a 21-day fast. I'd done some really stupid, what people would call stupid stuff today. It's like on my 21-day water fast, where I did all this blood work every 2 days during the fast, I rode 240 miles on the bike.
Wow.
My last fasted ride that I did, I rode 65 miles fasted. I had fasted 65 hours. Then I hopped on the bike, rode 65 miles with a diabetic nurse who was practically in a coma watching me. And we get to the place we were camping for the night, and she goes, just do me a favor and take, blood glucose reading. 37. She goes, you should be in a coma. You should be in a coma. I said, I feel fine. And she was so worried that I ate 2 brats, and I rode back with her the next day, 65 miles, just the 2 brats. And, that's the kind of thing I did. And I would do blood work before these and after these.
Do you remember what your insulin ran during these things, and what your LDL had to be crazy high during these fasts?
I can send you the spreadsheet.
Oh yeah, I would love to do. Yeah. I'll take a look at it. I'd be really curious, because my bet would be that during your fast and riding and all that, your LDL went crazy. Because when I do that, my ketones go crazy. So the fact that your sugar could be 37, your body didn't care about sugar anymore, because I'm running on fat and I got plenty to burn.
Yep.
So we'll see that if you were measuring ketones at that time, it had to be absolutely through the roof, I would think.
So I was measuring heart rate, ketones. I was measuring for certain fast. I did, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. What's the bone scan?
DEXA scan.
I did DEXAs before fasting. So I did a 15-day fast where I did a DEXA before and after, and just to see if I'd lose muscle. And I gained 5 kilograms of muscle and lost 12 kilograms of fat while fasting.
Oh man, I would love to see that. Pro's gonna be so
I've even got I still have all the original paperwork,
which is interesting actually, because the DEXA may be a better marker, because a lot of times what happens is when in my patients, in the first 2 or 3 months, when I do, we have something called a SICA, which is bioimpedance and looks at visceral fat and muscle mass.
Yep.
So a lot of times what will happen is muscle mass drops like crazy, and even if they're working out for the first time in their life, because they're burning out fat in the muscle, so the muscle is switching from being like a ribeye steak over to like a fillet, so they're more insulin sensitive. So I have Tro and I were just talking about this when he said he had an emergency, but because he was just at a conference and he was the fly in the ointment, because everyone's saying weight loss is what helps with diabetes control. I'm like, I have a guy who lost 4 pounds and reverses diabetes with 4 pounds of weight loss from 320 to 316. But he put on a ton of muscle during that time because the visceral fat inhibits the muscle. So what you did is you were burning off your visceral fat and your body goes, oh, I can put on muscle now because they inhibit each other. So that's amazing. That's really amazing data you have. I'm glad you collected that. I like science.
Yeah, so someday I'll write about it, but I haven't had time, and you'll see why in a second. But I was saving all the data, and keep in mind, I still had no idea why I was doing any of this other than I enjoyed bicycle riding. I enjoyed weight loss. I enjoyed helping other people. I had helped start some keto meetup groups in the St. Louis area. At the time, there wasn't near as many online keto resources or offline keto resources, and so, I was collecting all this information. Then in December, around December 15th of 2016, I got viral pneumonia at the office and worked through the entire episode of viral pneumonia, but I didn't ride the bike at all. And then felt fine when I was done getting over it. I used, I don't have a doctor, so I used non-traditional means of getting over the viral pneumonia and the bronchitis and what I later on learned to be either pericarditis or myocarditis. But on January 3rd, I went into AFib with RVR and didn't know it. Now, the only reason I know it was my watch recorded it. And on January 14th of 2017, I got on the bicycle, turning next to no RPMs. I could not keep my heart rate below 220. And my resting heart rate was 180. And I said, well, shoot, something is wrong here. Something is bad. And what had happened was in December, I had done blood work right before I did it on December 5th, before I got the pneumonia. And I called Dave. I was scheduled to do more blood work for him. And I said, look, Dave, I'm in pneumonia. I don't really think I should go do it. He goes, oh, no, perfect. Go do it. And so I said, okay, Dave. So I went and did a complete blood draw. And had I not done that, I wouldn't have had any clues. So you never know why you're doing things until later on. And
God's watching out for you too. And Dave's a great messenger, right? So probably you saw your SED rate was through the roof, and the inflammatory markers are crazy. I'll
pull up the spreadsheet real quick just so I don't get the numbers wrong. On December 5th, my CRP was 0.43, which isn't bad. On December 30th, when I did that blood draw, right at the end of the pneumonia, it was 43. Not 4.3, 43.
Yeah, I didn't even look from 0.4 to 43. That's a huge jump, and that's a red flag for infection and myocarditis and pericarditis and all this stuff and pneumonia. Yeah, for sure.
No, and I'm hacking because I think I've got bronchitis and all this other stuff. And anyhow, December 15th, I figured, well, okay, it's got to be the heart rate strap. There's no way my heart rate can be that high. So I go out on another slow bike ride, same thing, 220, 230. It's like, well, this is crazy. That can't be right. But this is the second heart rate strap. So that's when I knew something was wrong.
And you're still in the 220s at this weight-wise at this time, roughly?
Oh, no, I was 170-ish.
Holy cow. Oh, my God.
No, sorry, 270-ish.
270. Oh, okay. I was like, wow, okay.
So I'm still about 100 pounds overweight.
But you lost a lot of weight still, and you maintained that.
Yeah. And so anyhow, I'm sitting there, and I told my wife, something is wrong with my heart, but I don't know what. I don't feel bad or anything. I was asymptomatic at that point. I had no symptoms. I wasn't coughing or anything. Felt fine. Just couldn't do anything. But I still had my conditioning from all those long rides. And so I decided, well, I don't have a doctor. I don't even know what to look for. So I started Googling because that's what you do when you don't have a doctor. You get a doctor Google, right? And so I typed in, I didn't even know terms. So I typed in high heart rate. And I'm here to tell you, you don't do that on Google because you get a lot of porn. And so what happened was I finally found a definite, a glossary of cardiology terms. And then I found out, okay, what I'm looking for here is a specific term for a high heart rate, which of course. And I Googled it. And then I started getting information. Okay, what causes a high heart rate? And from then, I started looking at the data. And that's when I realized, oh my goodness, my CRP went up. I had to have a bad infection. So the first thing I do is I schedule another blood draw, right? Now, just so you know, I'm not cheating on my diet. On January 27th, which is literally 27 days after that last, no, 28 days after that last blood draw, my CRP was back down to 0.7. Only thing I did during that entire keto and intermittent fasting. And so that became my clue. Sorry, it was 0.6. So from 43 to 0.6. So I self-diagnosed with AFib with RVR. So for the people that don't know what that means, it's atrial fibrillation with rapid ventricular response, which based on my understanding could come from viral flu infections. And this is just me reading papers, not really knowing, basically learning basic cardiology. And so I found a cardiologist in St. Louis and I started emailing him. And I had to find one that take cash because I never carry insurance for health. And found one. And he goes, based on the data you're sending me, I think you're right. Come in, we'll do some scans. So they did a TTE, they did a TEE as well when they did the cardio version.
So these are just for people listening. These are two different types of echocardiograms. One's
Yes.
transthoracic, where they look across your chest, but the transesophageal is they can really look closer at the heart when they're looking for atrial fibrillation and holes in the heart.
Right, because they're going down the throat. They're getting behind. They're seeing the lungs as well. They're seeing the cavity, the pericardial cavity and all that stuff. And when I went through that, he came out and said, okay, you've got scarring on the heart. Then the AFib with RVR made sense, right? Because, once you have myocarditis, whether it was myocarditis, whatever combination of inflammation, whatever it did, it scarred the heart. And what that does then, of course, is as the electrical signal passes across the heart muscle, it reroutes the circuitry and it goes different ways. It does things wrong. And what happens then is your top of your heart is essentially beating at twice the rate of your bottom of your heart, in my case. A lot of cases, it's not that severe.
Yeah, so sometimes people are lucky and they get a heart block where, it's not, all those aren't going to the ventricles,
Right.
which are the big part of the heart.
Right.
So and I'll just for 1 second just make the point to people. When your doctor or anyone ever tells you that you have a mild case of pericarditis or myocarditis, there's no such thing. Because if you get an electrical short in the right place, it's all over.
Oh yeah, it's over. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a huge deal that people need to understand. It's like, okay, if you get myocarditis, pericarditis, this is where people just die suddenly for no reason, which we're seeing a huge uptick in, by the way. So it is really an issue with inflammation can cause these kind of problems, and the low carb ketogenic diet and lifestyle and stress management, all these other things we talk about, really decreased risk of these things happening. So
Exactly.
but that's really important. When you get this diagnosis, you're a long distance cyclist, and it's like, no doctor is going to want to clear you too long when they know you have a scar in your heart where you get this rapid heart rate or ventricular fibrillation, which is death until they shock your heart back.
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm not complaining about any of this because now I knew the real why. You sometimes never really know. I don't think I would have survived it if I was 600 plus pounds. I just don't see any way. I mean, I was in fantastic physical
because you had no
shape.
reserve when you're in really bad shape. When you're in good condition, that's why I have guys, they come in, they go, I have atrial fibrillation. They don't even know because they're in such good condition that they don't know it. And people who are really sick, you just throw it off that little where you have no reserve and you're a disaster. You can't breathe and you can't walk and you go, something's wrong. I got to go. Yeah. Like it's not even your choice. You probably pass out and they take you to the ER, right?
Yes, exactly. And to be clear, I did not have SVT. I had no ventricular fibrillation at all. And so that was a true blessing. All the damage was on the atrium and so in any case, he wanted to do an ablation. He referred me to an EP in his office, which is an electrophysiologist. They're the cardiologists that, as you know, they handle the electrical.
They're the
wire.
Electricians, yeah.
Yes, we're the other
there's
ones.
Plumbers that fix it and they put in stents, and then there's electricians, and they're different breeds most of the time.
So he wanted to burn the heart and scar what they do is with an ablation, they scar a new pathway they take and literally burn the surface of the heart and reroute the rerouted signal. And when I was thinking about it, just, I'm a software engineer, I'm thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Because as I continue to lose weight, the shape of the heart changes. This is why people need to get new ablations every 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years or whatever. So I decided, well, I'm not going to deal with this. So I decided, I just told the cardiologist, look, I want to try something else. He said, well, fine, come back to me when you change your mind. And so I made the decision at the end of February when that cardio version failed. It was actually about February 16th, 17th. I was going to fast it away because my reading had told me that they knew that you could regrow myocardium. Sorry, I'm having trouble pronouncing it. But basically, you can regrow heart cells. There are 3 types of heart cells, and they all regrow, but what they don't know is the rate. So depending on which animal model you looked at in the science studies, some animal models, they'd regrow at 27% a year. Some it would be 3% a year. And of course, they don't study this on humans because no moron in his right mind is going to fast when they're in heart failure. But I was that moron because I didn't know I was in heart failure, right?
And again, we're telling everyone this is not medical advice. This is
Yes,
what
exactly.
Tom did. He's still here to tell the story. So yeah, but there is definitely data on this too as an adjunctive therapy. I know several cardiologists who had people go from hospice diagnosis to hiking by a ketogenic diet, and that's real. That's documented. So, anyways, back to your story.
Yeah, so I go back. I start fasting, intermittent fasting. I would do 3 to 5 day fast. I did some blood work during there. I did for all my long fast. I do spreadsheets and track the data. And in September, I found a cardiologist in Cozumel, Mexico, that was U.S. trained. That was $28 an hour. And so I didn't call him. I swapped emails with him. He said, yeah, come on down. So I went down to Cozumel, Mexico with my beautiful bride for 2 weeks. And by then, it was difficult to ride bike. It was difficult to walk, but I could do it, not realizing how bad things are. I walked 4 miles to the hospital for my first appointment with the man. And so you can imagine this cardiologist, he speaks English, but his nurse doesn't. She gives him instructions. And by then, I had put on about 40 pounds. And this was a mistake I made. I thought I had to do long fast to lose, to have the heart cells regenerate, but I was wrong. And I got data for it now, but at the time I didn't have data. I was just guessing. And so I was eating almond butter to put weight on because I was worried that I would have to do a 40, 50-day fast. I had no idea. The longest I'd ever done was 21. I figured, well, whatever it takes to get rid of that scar tissue, that's what I want to do. So anyhow, the lady, the nurse, freaked out, ran out of the room screaming in Spanish, which fortunately I understand enough to know she was screaming. And the doctor comes in and he goes, well, your heart rate's 230. I goes, yeah. I mean, I walked over here. Well, where are you staying? And I told him, he goes, you walked 4 miles to get here? And I go, yeah. I mean, I didn't ride my bike. I have it with me. And so they couldn't do any of the scans they wanted to the first day because you have to have your heart rate down. So he loads me up with metoprolol to get the heart rate down. Says, go back, take this, come back the next day. We'll do the TTE and we'll try to do more scans and blood work. And that's when he measured my—
Tom, by this time, how long were you in this, you weren't in atrial fibrillation at that point? You were in—
Oh, no, still in AFib. I was in AFib for 9 months.
So they didn't echo. Did they ever get a cardiac out, like what your ejection fraction was during that time?
Well, that's what I got in September. See, I didn't bother to get it in February because I had no idea what to even look for. So I get this TTE from this Mexican cardiologist, great guy. And he calls me in the next day and he goes, I got really bad news. He goes, you need a heart transplant. Your LVEF is 27.
Yeah.
Now that's not terrible, as you know, but there are people far worse off. Don't get me wrong, but 27 is not good.
Yeah.
And I was having trouble walking upstairs,
And he
and
probably said you needed a defibrillator also at that time.
he wanted to put in an ICD, and then he
Yeah.
wanted to also schedule me for a heart transplant. Literally said, become a Mexican citizen. It takes 1 year. And down here, we can get you hearts fast because nobody can afford them. So that was the plan. That was the backup plan. But then he let the wrong words out of his mouth. I go, well, what about the scarring? And he says, I see no sign of scarring. He said, he used injection to, track flow and everything. He goes, I don't see any scarring. I don't know what you're talking about. He said, you must have had high blood pressure. And I go, no, I've got all these blood pressure readings from all that bicycling. I've never had high blood pressure. It was like, my blood pressure at the time in his office was 125/75. And he's like, well, that just must be a fluke from the Metoprolol because that's what it's for. He's like, so you had high blood pressure and you had this event. And I said, no, it was scarring, but he couldn't see it, so he's just going based on what he sees. So I said, well, I know that you're not going to like this, but I said, I don't want to do that right away. I want to continue fasting. And I explained my logic. And keep in mind, I found this guy because he was a keto-friendly, low-carb friendly doctor that leaned kind of like Ted Naiman towards the protein side of the fence. And his wife did protein, low-carb research in Mexico City. She was a doctor too. And so he goes, hey, let's try it. Let's see what happens. So I continued fasting, and I went back in December, and my LVEF had gotten up to 47.
Wow, 20 points. That's almost doubled.
It's unbelievable, right? And it's going the right way. I'm almost back to normal.
And what kind of fasting were you doing? Like 3-day fast or
3 to 5 day fast?
Yeah.
And so I started tracking BNP then, because before the September visit, I had not looked for. I needed to find a way to kind of have a parallel measurement to TTE LVEF. I needed to know my ejection fraction, but I couldn't find a way to measure it. Down in Mexico is 500 a pop for a TTE. And I found a cardiologist in Missouri, he's a great guy, that would do them for about $600. But I didn't want to do that every day. So I do blood work, and I started watching BNP. And what I discovered is a 3-day fast, I could cut my BNP levels in half. And then, so that was great, right? Because I can start measuring. And for those that don't know, BNP, what it's doing is it's cleaning up damaged cells that have essentially been shed during this process. So they're floating in the bloodstream. The body releases BNP, brain-notropic peptide, is that right?
Naturopath.
There's three different forms of it, but it's released into the bloodstream, and you can measure that. So that
it has to do with the stretch of the heart. So the more your heart is stretched with heart failure, the worse that BNP becomes. And then as you treat the heart failure, generally what we did was Lasix or water pills. So what you were doing is diuresing because you were dropping your insulin so low that you're losing salt. So people on a keto diet that think they lose 20 pounds the first week, and that's not 20 pounds of fat. A lot of that times that's dropping the insulin level, so you're peeing out extra salt. And that's why we recommend eating more salt during that time. In your case, we wouldn't have recommended that because of the heart failure stuff. But for the general person who has a healthy heart, then you go, okay, add some salt in and you'll do fine.
So the bad news is, keep in mind, I didn't have a doctor, and I knew the low sodium advice for heart failure, right? But in March of that year, I discovered on the way to the office that if I drank a sugar-free Monster with erythritol, if I drank one of these,
that brings up a topic I have to address. Yes.
So the reason I'm glad I brought it up. Gives you an intro for that topic, which is hot right now. I discovered that my heart rate would drop 15 beats a minute in 10 minutes. I discovered this on the way to the office. Keep in mind, I had a heart rate strap on 24/7. So I could literally sit and watch it.
So when you had the high caffeine, when you had the energy drink, your heart rate dropped.
Yes, with all that caffeine.
Wow.
Which gets better, right? And keep in mind, my wife, great gal, pure as the driven snow. That's poison. Don't drink that. And so I said, okay, just watch this. So I bought another one, drank it. And she's like, unbelievable. I mean, it just drops off. And we knew at that point later on that the ischemia, the heart, the shape of the heart was the problem, because the scarring was gone. And what he said is basically at this point, the AFib is self-maintaining because of the high heart rate. Your heart rate's out of shape. Your heart's out of shape.
Yeah, you get a cardiomyopathy. You get an enlarged heart from like fibrillating all the time. Yeah.
Yep, the walls are thicker and all that stuff, right? So I was drinking 5 of those a day. Now, if you do all the sodium counts, I was drinking 3,500 milligrams of soda. Yeah, 3,500 milligrams of sodium a day, just in those. And I'm a heavy salter, so I did the exact opposite of the advice that you would give a patient. But I got all the blood work if you want to look at it. I know you're getting curious.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's really that's fascinating, and it could be also partially that the caffeine was improving your contractility of your heart, so it was slowing it down because it was more functional. Because the way the heart works is like, if you can imagine a bulb and you're trying to pump water from one thing to another, if you're going too fast, it doesn't fill. So sometimes you slow it down, or if it becomes more contractile, now it doesn't have to pump out as, if it's pumping more out each time, it doesn't have to beat as many times.
yes.
Yeah, which is interesting. I would never have thought that would be. I would think it would make it worse for sure. My advice would have been never drink a Monster drink ever,
Oh, and I still drink about 3 a day, but I was drinking 5 a day. And of course, I'm documenting all this stuff because I'm a numbers guy. I want to know what's happening with the numbers. So in December, when I met with the cardiologist, I was almost normal. I could bike again. I biked 400 miles while I was in heart failure and AFib. And so I go back to him and I said, okay, I'm going to try to get cardioverted in the States. And that's when I went back and found a cardiologist in St. Louis, a guy that most people would know as the skeptical cardiologist online, but it's Dr. Anthony Pearson. And he's not fat phobic. He doesn't embrace fat. He doesn't say, well, go out, and he does like his statins like most cardiologists. And he's more skeptical than most. But the thing I liked about him was he was a patient advocate. And so he said, well, if you can get that up a little more, we'll go ahead and cardiovert you. And at the time, I'd done enough research to know that I had to watch. There were 7 blood markers that I needed to get to a certain range, because once you go a year without a cardioversion with your heart that high, they're reluctant to cardiovert you because your heart will go right back out because it's used to the high rate, your scheme, your
the longer you're in atrial fibrillation, the harder it is to cardiovert. Just like the longer you're diabetic, the harder it is to reverse it, all these kind of things. By the way, I didn't ask you, were you ever diagnosed with diabetes during your journey? Or I know you weren't seeing doctors, but you had to have seen it on your labs, no?
I took one lab report when I was doing the Atkins shakes, and it came back. At the time they measured fructosamine, and I would have to look up to see what my number is, but it was off the charts. And so I called my retired doctor at the time and asked him what that meant. He said, well, don't give blood right now.
Yeah, because they're going to document it now, right?
Yeah. Okay. And so I didn't give blood. But that was the only time I really had, like, what you would call, I had lots of pre-diabetes numbers. And keep in mind, I had a nightmare one night. My blood glucose went from mid 80s to 137, and it stayed. I literally remember I woke up. I said, I've had a nightmare. My heart was racing. This is before the AFib. So I took a blood glucose reading, and it was 137, and it did not go down for 24 hours. And then it tapered off. This is before the CGMs, of course. I would have loved to have CGM data. That would have been fabulous. But that's a whole nother stomach, because I know those things are forbidden, except for by you and other people. But anyhow, so they cardioverted me in February of 2018, and it stuck for 22 months. 22 months of bliss. I started losing weight. I dropped about 40 to 50 pounds during that. And then I had my second AFib with RVR incident. That one was caused, we had later determined, by mold. We had moved into our RV. We now live in our RV, and those things are very susceptible to get black mold. And I learned that when I went into RVR, it's like, well, this is strange. It wasn't as bad as the first episode. My high heart rate at the time was maybe 150, 160. And my lower one was, I'm going to say resting was around 120. But at that time, I kind of knew what to look for, right? I'm a little smarter. I don't have to Google high heart rate. So I fasted on and off for 6 weeks. They cardioverted me and it stuck for another 12 months.
And when you fasted, you were eating keto when you were eating then, right? Like a low carb
Yep.
keto?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say very religious, lazy keto. Like I wouldn't avoid the monsters. I mean, somebody that's pure as the driven snow would not drink a monster.
Yeah, I would, even knowing what I know, I still would have said no.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Because you had atrial fibrillation is going to speed up your heart rate. It just makes common sense, but you had the,
yes.
As a matter of fact, it's funny. One of my patients had some stuff and she had a pneumonia. And this is years ago before COVID and all this fun stuff. And I go, look, why we got you in the hospital? We're getting you off the cigarettes because it's going to kill you. So we took her off this. So what happened was, she had bradycardia. She had a heart block. So
I didn't know it till then. Wow.
She didn't know it because she was smoking all the time. So when I took her off cigarettes, she was mad at me. She's like, "How dare you? Now look at all these problems I have." I go, "No, you had a problem forever, but the nicotine was masking it." She goes, "Then why you let me smoke?" "Oh, because you have COPD and lung disease and all this. It's gonna kill you too." Like, So anyways, we got her heart squirted, but it was funny because she's like, "See, I was fine when I was smoking." She's telling her husband, "I was fine. Look what you did to me." I'm like, "Well, you weren't fine because you're not breathing." Anyways, it's just funny how sometimes we can mask the underlying problem. So now you got the hard stuff, and now we're up to speed.
Yeah. So I do it again. 6 weeks. I'm out of AFib. They cardiovert me. I go out of AFib. Then a year later, I get it from mold again, and we literally find it. It's in our bedroom.
And you're preaching to the choir here because I had bad mold allergies, and I got
and when it happens, as you know,
horrible it's stuff.
Horrible. And so it took another 6 weeks the third time, and I went back out. And at the time, I would measure like weight in the morning versus at night. I would lose 7 to 12 pounds at night of water. I mean, because as you know, when you go to AFib or RVR, you're peeing every 10, 15 minutes, literally.
Yeah, when you're laying down, what happens is you're pressurizing. You're not having all that that swelling in your feet. Then it's like being in a swimming pool and you have to pee because it's pushing it back into the circulation so you can pee it out. Yeah.
Right. So I usually get the thoracic edema. I rarely get it at my feet. My circulation is still pretty good. Like even when I'm in AFib, my oxygenation is 96, 97 all the time. So I've got all those readings too. So fast forward to last year, I've had 3 episodes recovered. Each time I have an episode, I put on about 40 pounds, most of it probably water. I also lose muscle because I'm less active. Then I recover and I start losing again. And then I'm bouncing back and forth between 330, sometimes getting up to 360, 370. And in February of last year on President's Day, we went to see our son, and we were in a hotel, and I dried off in the bathtub. I stepped out onto that little shower towel thing they give you as a mat. My foot shot out because they had highly waxed the floor, and I fell onto the ground and snapped my quad tendon. And I didn't know what it was at the time because it was weird. It would only hurt if the knee bent. But of course, my knee is one way under the toilet. My leg is the other way. I lift it over the toilet, straighten it out again so I'm not in pain. Get out of the way so the wife can come in and get me. We scoot out to the bedroom, and I can't stand up. And you obviously know what a snap quad tendon does. But basically what happens is when you bend the knee, the quad tendon is above the knee. It keeps the kneecap in place. So if you bend the knee and there's nothing there to hold in place, it shoots down, and that hurts really bad. So we go to the hospital there. We're at the hospital 10 hours. I'm fortunate I haven't had COVID, and I'm in this hospital full of people with COVID coughing for 10 hours. I'm the last person they look at, and their MRI machine doesn't work. They do an x-ray and they say, well, we can't see anything broken, but we can't get you in for an MRI for 2 or 3 days. And so we decided to come home. So I came back, did more Googling because that's what I do, called a friend who's an orthopedic surgeon and described it. And I said, I think I've either got a snapped, I forget the tendon on the backside, or a snapped quad tendon. And he scheduled me for a local MRI. They did it and found the quad tendon was snapped. The reason I'm mentioning this was in all that reading, I found that there was research that if you fast before and after the surgery, that you heal much faster. And so I told my orthopedic surgeon this, said, I'm going to fast. And he goes, well, do whatever you want. I don't recommend it. And I said, fine. And so I fasted for 2.5 days before the surgery. I took one pain pill. Of course, I'm under for the surgery. But the whole time, this whole experience, I can't move. I'm in bed. I'm bedridden for this last, literally for 4 months. I couldn't get out of bed. I was using bed pants and all that. And when he did the surgery, he said that the tear was so clean and the lack of inflammation. He had quoted me $3,300 cash for the surgery. He knocked it down to $1,300 because it went so quickly.
Wow.
And so, yeah, he was literally cheaper than the anesthesiologist. So anyhow, I go through rehab. I'm almost out of rehab in May of last year, and I go back into AFib. So at that point in time, I'm walking 2 miles a day. I am still in AFib today. Now, the one thing that's consistent with each of these AFib incidents is they're less severe. And that's unusual because most people get worse, right? But I'm going to the same cardiologist, getting the same scans and everything. Same guy running the TTEs, same guy doing the TEEs. Same guy I had 3 CCTAs at the time. So I had cardiac calcium scores. I reversed that. I went from a 63 to 41 in 2.5 years.
Wow.
And that's measured in a CCTA. It's not the quick scan. And so in any case, this incident has been the least stressful. Normally my heart rate runs in the high 90s now when I'm in AFib with RVR, when I'm at the desk. If I get up and exercise, it may go up to 115, 120, but I'm rarely in tachycardia now. My LVEF, when it was measured in October, they tried to cardiovert me, was 43. So not terrible, not great. My BNP level is 21. So there's something else wrong. When they cardioverted me, it lasted 10 seconds. And I went right back into, so I don't know the primary cause this time. I thought it was mold, but I don't think it is now. I don't know what it is. So I've got to begin doing the research. I've got to do more blood work, look at my vitamin B levels, run the full panels, look for mold toxicity. I've never had to do a mold toxicity panel because it was obvious when you see the mold on the wall. So I'm still in AFib with RVR. So that's why I'm saying I may not be, this is just the reality of this. Keto, fasting, low carb, there's no guarantee that you won't have some kind of heart event. That's the bottom line. You can still have heart events. You could still have an MI. Now, it's very unlikely that I'll have an MI with a CAC of 41, but I could still have an MI. I could have I could have sudden scarring on the ventricles, and it happens. So, or I could have a clot, and it happens. From inflammation. So I continue to do the diet. Right now, I weighed this morning. I was 378. So I'm kind of at the top peak. I've been in heart failure now since May. So what is that? About 10 months, 9-10 months.
Yeah.
And my LVF is still, if I had to guess, I would say it's around 43, 45, based on how I feel. And so that's the kind of the rest of the story. My journey's not over.
Awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. We'll have you in a follow-up show and get that figured out down the road when you get the AFib and all that stuff. So what advice would you give someone who's like in your situation in the beginning, if they weigh 500 plus pounds and they're listening right now? What would you say to that person?
I would say, for one thing, to understand bias. To me, I think the most misunderstood thing in medicine and in nutrition is that everybody has bias, and whether they're cognizant of it or not, they have a bias. So if something kind of works for me, I develop a bias. And so you need to become self-aware. But when you're reading these studies, you have to understand bias. So if for instance, there was one I saw this morning where they were looking at vegans and vegetarians, the people that undertook the study declared no bias. They declared no conflicts of interest. But the study was funded by Loma Linda there near you. And so there's bias.
Yeah.
So
I
you
think
just have to
there's so much that we run into that you see, and
Yes.
you go, oh, who's funding? I ask those questions all the time, like who's funding it before I really jump to a conclusion.
Yes.
And
And so my advice is, it's not that bias is bad, but if you understand it, then you understand their perspective. And then you just take that into account when you're making your decisions. And the other thing that I would say is decide fast, because you just don't know. I like to fail fast and I like to succeed fast. And I have to do that based on daily measurements, whether I can see long-term results or not. I go based a lot on how I feel. I'm very aware of when I'm in AFib, when I'm not. I'm very aware when my heart rate is high.
Plus, you're following labs and you have a scientific mind. You want to know, because the doctors aren't going to take this much interest in what you're doing. I guarantee it.
They don't.
I don't do all these labs that you're doing. This is unreal. So I'm excited to see
crazy.
your data.
I have 45 documented blood tests since 2016.
And you prove so many points too. It's like, okay, it's not just gluttony.
Yeah.
It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you don't do stuff. It's not that you don't care. So all these things, these stereotypes that come out when someone struggles with weight, it's so frustrating. And also, we don't know where someone else is on their journey. If you're going from 900 pounds and you get down to 360 or something, it's like, wow, that's a huge thing. Or like you said, these little things, being able to go up the stairs by yourself, being able to take your shoes off by yourself. These things that to other people, one of my favorite guys, he said, you know what? I got off the ground without using a chair and he's in his 30s because I've been able to do that for 10 years. You go, wow, that is awesome, man. I mean, that is really cool. Like little things that most people don't appreciate when you're able to start doing those things again, like, walking or
just like,
time.
I hate to say it, walking to use the bathroom again. Because, I lost the weight and then I had the problem. Imagine if I was 600 pounds and I snapped my quad tendon. That would have been a disaster.
Yeah. And then your doctor would have said it's because of your weight that happened, right?
Exactly.
So that's what's so frustrating. People go, no, it's because I fell. It's because I slipped. That's what happened. So yeah, and while we're on these topics, I have to say something. And wait, before I say that, Tom, like, where do people find you if they want to track you down or they want to hear more? I know you're on Twitter.
If you Google Tom Seest, unfortunately, one of the things that I started studying when COVID started is I'm very interested in viral content and content management, online content development. So if you Google my name, you'll see pages of articles. And probably my favorite one, the one that gets the most reads, is I documented how I knew I reversed all I'll say is I reversed my cardiac calcium score, but I will not say that I know how I did it, because I had the measurements to prove that it went backwards. But I do so many things at once. I'm not, when you're living,
it's confounded when you try all these things. You go, which one did it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, when you're living life, you're trying to solve problems. You're not sitting there trying to make medical statements. And so, I'm doing all these things at once. But that YouTube on that gets 45 views a week. My Medium article on that experience gets a lot. I'm on Twitter. Not on Facebook much. I'm on Twitter more than anything. I love bias.
At Tom Seest, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's what it is. So we'll track you down. I'm following him. Anyone's following me, you can track him down there. And so, so thanks. And also Roxana says, thanks for helping get her social media game going. You helped her get off the ground.
Yeah, that was interesting. She contacted me early on. She's doing quite well with it. It's kind of one of those passing things. I just don't know if I'll have tomorrow. And so you kind of, when you're in that position, you start running down all the rabbit trails. It becomes fun. It's like, okay, so you're less inhibited, you're more appreciative, and you're just more aware. It's not that you're not that way every day anyway, but you're just more aware of it. I don't know. I may not be here tomorrow.
Yeah, you appreciate your health and you do what you can. You do everything.
Exactly. You do the best you can with that period of time.
And then it's in God's hands after that, right?
Exactly.
But part of it's getting the stress level down, all the stuff you're doing great stuff, despite being in a storm right now. Thank you for joining us with that.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your time and coming on, because these are the stories people need to hear, because we want to give hope. We want to, so many people are
Yeah.
hopeless and they think I can never do, but from where you came from, being on 2 scales, trying to weigh yourself and you still can't get a weight, you realize, man, it's a long journey, and you make so
Yep.
many great points. So I really appreciate you coming on. And then the other point you raised that I want to transition for a second is erythritol. There's new studies coming out. My bias was to say, yeah, this is BS. It's it's going to be some kind of hit job, but there's actually very good studies. And I want to speak nicely about Tro. No, everyone promised that you won't tell him, but he called me, goes, Brian, we really have to do a talk on this, because his wife has a product with erythritol in it. He goes, if this is true, and we can say it's true, then we have to change what we're doing at great cost. He'll do it. It doesn't matter. That's integrity. When you're going to, so many of the doctors I respect, Fetke, Noakes, like all these people that they put their careers on the line because they said this is the right thing. So I want you to know that Tro was the instigator of saying, hey, let's all get 4 of the best minds we know, 3 plus me, and talk about it and go through the study. Is it legit? Is this not legit? Is this something we take seriously? And he came to the conclusion it is. And we all came to the conclusion it is, and to minimize. And so he goes, we have to change what we're doing. So that tells you integrity of a person, right? So when I heard him, Tro, saying that, he's the one who didn't say, yeah, I don't think it's a problem, I think it's overblown. He said, no, I think he was the most dramatic, saying it was serious and it was legit.
I saw that.
And so these are the things. So our Patreon supporters, you can listen to that today. And by the time this episode comes out, that episode will be released to the general population. But it is really, that says something. You can question people all you want. When you're going to take a financial loss and to do the right thing, that's character right there. So I'm proud of my partner here, and I know his integrity, and I've watched his integrity over the last 5 years, and so I'm proud to be a co-host with him on this podcast, and also Jason Fung, his integrity. So anyways, I think it's like people see truth and reality, and you see who's going to try to hide the truth to make a buck, and I'm telling you, Tro is not that guy. So no one tell Tro I'm saying nice things about him, but that's the truth, and I have to say it. But again, Tom, thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you. And if you're struggling, do your own research. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Tro's. Don't take Tom's word for it. Say, let me see what works for me, because you may have a different solution than Tom had, or that I have, or that Tro has. But it's really seeking and saying, let me learn, let me look at the literature myself, not what the interpretation of the literature is, because as we all say, there's so much bias out there. And so, we may in 6 months, so we say, okay, we're going to reverse ourselves. There's more data that came out that says it's not a problem, right? So anyways,
if you want to do a study on erythritol withdrawal, I'll be happy to do blood work and withdrawal, and we can just watch the blood work and see what changes. It'd be interesting. It would be interesting to see how it affects the heart and the blood work.
Yeah, so we'll see. Maybe that's the answer to your problem. I mean, that may be the answer.
I'm not going to go back to 6 liters of pop, though.
Don't do it. Don't do it. And that's the thing. That's the conclusion we came up to, is like, look, it's like methadone or heroin. None of them are a good option. But you say, if I'm trying to come off heroin, I do it the way I can. The healthiest option is to cut out all sweeteners if you can. There's no question about that. That we don't need them, but we enjoy them. So it's some of those where we have to do some soul searching also on that. So everyone, thank you. This is great stuff. I'm so glad we got to spend this time together. So seek out Tom, find him if you need help, and be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Chill out a little bit, take it easy.
Yeah.
Don't stress every detail, and just do the best you can.
Absolutely.